Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qi. Coming up in this edition, Chinese President Xi Jinping underscores dialogue and cooperation to be the only correct choice for China and the United States. Russia has criticized NATO's defense spending boost as adding fuel to the fire in its conflict with Ukraine. And political tensions are flaring in the Democratic Republic of the Congo as the former President Joseph Kabila faces accusations of aiding the M23 rebel group. We begin with China-US ties. Chinese President Xi Jinping says dialogue and cooperation are the only correct choice for the country and the United States. He made the remarks in a phone call with his US counterpart, Donald Trump. The two leaders agreed that teams from both sides should continue implementing the deal they reached at the high-level economic and trade meeting in Geneva last month and will hold a new round of talks. President Xi invited Trump to visit China again, an offer Trump warmly appreciated. Trump also said the U.S. welcomes Chinese students to study in the country. President Putin has more details.
The phone call between Presidents Xi and Trump was highly anticipated, given the trade tensions between the two nations in recent weeks. During the call, Xi Jinping said that recalibrating the direction of the great ship that is China-US relations requires both presidents to take the helm and set the right course. Xi also said that it's imperative to steer clear of the various disturbances and disruptions, and that the two sides need to make good use of the economic and trade consultation mechanism already in place and seek win-win results in the spirit of equality and respect for each other's concerns. Noting that the two countries' lead officials recently held an economic and trade meeting in Geneva at the suggestion of the US side, Xi said that meeting marked an important step forward in resolving the relevant issues through dialogue and consultation. Xi said both sides should make good on the agreement reached in Geneva, noting that the Chinese always honor and deliver what's been promised. He said China has been seriously and earnestly executing the agreement, and the US side should acknowledge the progress already made and remove the negative measures taken against China. Xi went on to say the two sides should enhance communication in such fields as foreign affairs, economy and trade, military and law enforcement, to build consensus, clear up misunderstandings, and strengthen cooperation. He emphasized that the United States must handle the Taiwan question with prudence. Trump, for his part, said that he has great respect for President Xi and that the US-China relationship is very important. He said the US wants the Chinese economy to do very well and that the US and China working together can get a lot of things done. He also said the US will honor the One China policy. The meeting in Geneva was very successful and produced a good deal, Trump said, adding that the US will work with China to execute the deal. The two presidents agreed that their teams should continue implementing the Geneva deal and hold another round of talks as soon as possible.
That was President Putin on the phone call between the Chinese and US presidents. In Europe, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says he's confident that NATO allies will commit to spending 5% of their annual GDP on defense. It's a long-standing demand from the Trump administration that has resurfaced weeks before heads of state gather for the NATO summit in the Netherlands. William Denslow has more from the NATO headquarters in Brussels.
Faced with an increasingly dangerous world, NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte says the military alliance needs to become stronger, fairer and more lethal. To achieve that, he says substantially more spending is needed. The NATO chief has proposed an investment plan that will see alliance members boost defence spending from the current benchmark of 2% of annual GDP to 5%. 3.5% will go towards core defence spending and 1.5% will go towards security-linked investments, such as critical infrastructure.
We use this word often, historic. But I think we are allowed today to use that word, that the decision today is historic. When you look at the capability targets we agreed on, this is such an enormous increase.
5% in defence spending has been a long-term goal of the US administration. President Donald Trump says that NATO allies haven't been pulling their weight. US Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth says he's confident the target will be agreed at a summit in The Hague later in June.
There are a few countries, not quite there yet. I won't name any names. It's amongst friends in that room. We'll get them there.
At the Hague summit, boosting NATO's defence industrial base will be a priority, as will discussions on how to continue supporting Ukraine. But defence spending will dominate. During a press conference at the conclusion of this defence ministers' meeting, Mark Rutte defended the decision to substantially scale up its capability targets. While NATO might be in a strong position today, he warns that without decisive action, in half a decade, the military alliance could be really under threat.
That is William Denslow reporting from Brussels. Russia has criticized NATO's defense spending boost as adding fuel to the fire in its conflict with Ukraine. The Kremlin has vowed to respond to the latest wave of attacks by Ukraine. Ukrainian drones struck Russian air bases, including one in Siberia in the far north last weekend. Moscow also accused Kyiv of a strike on the rail bridges in southern Russia, which killed 7 people. Kyiv has not taken responsibility for the rail attacks. Dasha Chinishova has more from Moscow.
Well, we are hearing the Russian officials all saying that what the alliance is looking for is further escalation of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We've heard the senior Russian lawmaker Leonid Slutsky, who is the head of Russia's Foreign Affairs Committee at the State Duma, suggesting that the alliance is ready to continue to interfere with the direct negotiations between Moscow and Kiev that have just resumed. He is stressing that one of the positions that Moscow has been outlining is the need for the non-bloc status of Ukraine, so that it is out of NATO alliance, as well as does not possess the nuclear weapons. In the meantime, the Kremlin is saying that what it would have preferred to see is the international condemnation of the Ukrainian attacks carried out against the civilian infrastructure, particularly in Russia's Bryansk and Kursk region, where the trains derailed after the explosions, and those attacks have actually led to the death of at least 7 people. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has also noted that despite those attacks, Moscow is still willing to continue the negotiations with the Ukrainian counterparts when it comes to the level of the delegations that have been talking in Istanbul in 2 rounds, and Moscow believes that all means to resolve the conflict through diplomatic and political possibilities and channels should be used. But at the same time, the Kremlin is saying that Moscow would indeed be responding to the Ukrainian attacks against the Russian military airfields. The scale of that response is up to the Ministry of Defense, and the Kremlin is not providing any further details on that.
That was Dasha Chinisheva reporting from Moscow. In the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that Israel has been arming local criminal groups in Gaza to counter Hamas, saying the move has helped save Israeli soldiers' lives. Netanyahu also said the bodies of 2 Israeli Americans have been returned to Israel in a special operation by the Israeli army and the security agency. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
It is very important to bring also those who are dead so that they could have a proper burial, sort of a closure for the families. And this is what happened. The couple, Gadi Hagai and Judy Hagai, both residents of the communities in southern Israel and also American citizens, they were killed and kidnapped during the Hamas raid on October 7th, 2023. They left on that Saturday morning at 6 a.m. They left for their morning walk. Half an hour later, they began to search a refuge from the thousands of rockets that were being fired. And shortly after, they were found by the militants who crossed into Israel. They were killed and their bodies taken back into the Gaza Strip. The bodies were held by the same organization that held the bodies of mother Shiri Bibas and her 2 children that were returned recently to Israel. And in an operation still quite clandestine, not a lot of details have been given. The Army and the Internal Security Agency recovered the 2 bodies back to Israel for identification, and they've been now given back to the families.
That's Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Turning to the Americas, Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan families living legally in the United States are facing deportation after the U.S. Supreme Court allowed revocation of their protected status. Nita Soledad Perez sent this report from Miami.
Venezuelan families across America are facing difficult choices. At a press conference Wednesday, community leaders pleaded for their survival.
We're lost. We don't know where to turn, what to do, or even which saint to pray to. We're searching for justice, but we don't know who to ask anymore. What did we do? Donald Trump, what did we Venezuelans do to deserve this? There are more than 600,000 of us.
Earlier this month, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to strip temporary protected status from some 350,000 Venezuelans, putting them on a deportation path. The High Court also revoked humanitarian parole for another 117,000 Venezuelans who had passed security checks and secured U.S. sponsors under former President Biden.
It's tragic, heartbreaking, and above all, it's uncertain. That's the word, uncertainty. So, as organizations, what can we do? Continue respectfully urging this administration, in the most courteous tone possible, to reconsider its measures.
Many affected Venezuelans live in South Florida, where legal protections allow them to work and build lives. Families now face losing jobs, homes, and health insurance, and there are fears of a mental health crisis among Venezuelan children.
We have received reports from parents whose children, fearing deportation, have expressed suicidal thoughts. The emotional toll, fear, and legal uncertainty are severely affecting the mental health of thousands of migrant children.
We do have a mental health crisis, especially with those kids who do not even speak Spanish, and they're facing the situation that they're going to go back to their home country, which they've never set a foot in. So their fear, the bullying in school, the losing of the opportunities from the country that is supposed to, and they're supposed to be feel free and safe going to a country of uncertainty.
Wednesday, the Trump administration announced even tougher restrictions for Venezuelans seeking legal U.S. entry. Legal advocates are challenging these decisions in lower courts. But as of now, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan families remain in limbo, caught between a homeland that they don't want to return to and an adopted country that no longer wants them.
That's Nita Soledad Perez in Miami. Finally, in Africa, political tensions are flaring in the Democratic Republic of the Congo as former President Joseph Kabila faces accusations of aiding the M23 rebel group. This comes after the Senate revoked Kabila's immunity, opening the door to the possibility of charges of treason and war crimes. Michael Baliki reports from Kampala.
Joseph Kabila's return to Goma comes at a critical moment. The former leader, who ruled for nearly 2 decades, is now accused of supporting the M23, a rebel group tied to Rwanda. Kinshasa claims it has evidence, but Kabila says it's a political witch hunt. Geopolitical analysts say he still commands loyalty within the army and political elites.
Kabila probably is looking at an overhaul because Kabila knows that the end game in the DRC security question or insecurity question, there must be a political process. There are no two ways about it. And the fact that he was president 2 terms, 10 years, he has a footing and he has a following, and he can come back and launch himself politically, and I think he has space.
Last week, regional leaders met in Uganda to discuss peace, but with Kinshasa and Kigali at odds over the M23, any progress is fragile.
It is solvable because here in Uganda we solved it. We had the same problems. Sectarianism of religion, sectarianism of tribes. We exposed that misanalysis. Why don't you look at trade and exchange of goods and services and building the economies?
The humanitarian toll keeps rising. More than 7 million are displaced. Aid groups are stretched thin, and rebels continue to exploit eastern DR Congo's vast mineral wealth. The issue isn't whether Kabila faces justice, it's about survival for the DR Congo. Regional leaders want stability, but Kinshasa is pushing for accountability. Balancing the two won't be easy. Kabila's 2019 exit marked Congo's first peaceful power transfer, but his fallout with President Tshisekedi shattered alliances. Now, with legal threats looming, the risk of instability is rising.
The International Contact Group urges once again the parties to implement the immediate and unconditional ceasefire and call on all armed groups, including those supported by foreign actors, to lay down their arms and continue dialogue to put an end to the violence and protect civilian populations.
Regional analysts warn that what happens next to Kabila could either pull the DRC back or push it into deeper conflict.
That was Michael Baliki reporting. Now, recapping the headlines before we go, Chinese President Xi Jinping underscored dialogue and cooperation to be the only correct choice for China and the US during a phone call with US President Donald Trump. Russia has criticized NATO's defense spending boost as adding fuel to the fire in its conflict with Ukraine. And political tensions are flaring in the Democratic Republic of the Congo as former President Joseph Kabila faces accusations of aiding the M23 rebel group. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.